Hey, how's it going? This is Joe Intel, and I just noticed that I didn't review the Fluance Ai41s. These were sent to me a while ago, and you know, I get a ton of stuff and I just kind of skipped through. I saw these in my garage after a long while. I'm like, you know what? I actually did review these. I made my notes, I listened to them, and I spent some time with them, and I have an idea what I like, what I don't like about these, and I'm gonna let you guys know. So a few things. I reviewed the Ai40 and the Ai60s way back a few years ago. Fluance was actually one of the first companies to send me speakers when I was first starting out, so I really appreciate them. Actually, I had a nice dinner with them over there in Vegas at a previous CES, so you know, I like those guys. Those guys are cool. With that out of the way, some quick changes. So the main one, the most important one that you will notice is that this one is now ported. We're going to talk about why that's good, why that's bad, and so on. I really liked the Ai40s when they came out because they looked so cool, and the price point at that time was $199 for a pair of powered speakers. And wow, what could you get for $199 at the time? Not very much. So that one exceeded my expectations. But one of the early issues that I had with the Ai40s, which they've since fixed, was that the power brick actually had a lot of noise depending on what you plugged in. And so they resolved that later on. I noticed that this one doesn't have a power brick. This just uses a two-prong connection, which means that they have the power supply built in to the amplifier. I did notice that this is quieter than the previous Ai40 that I reviewed. Not perfect, there still is that amplifier hiss that I hear in many of the more affordable speakers. Some that are actually much more expensive than this, they still have some of that hiss. I do hear it with these as well. One of my pet peeves, but just wanted to let you guys know. If I turn this around, you will see that this does have a subwoofer output, which wasn't available on the earlier Ai40, but later on they put it into the Ai60s. So starting off with the front, you actually get two speakers. This is the powered one, and so you see the plate amp right here on the back. You will see a 5-inch woofer, a 1-inch soft dome tweeter. This woofer looks like it's some kind of carbon composite, rubber surround, and you have the IR port and the volume knob, which is multifunctional on the front. Nice little logo on the front, and they always have a very nice finish for the price. I don't know how they're able to do it at this price, and yeah, it's very nice looking for sure. The rounded edges, I like that. Again, on the back, you'll see the port. A button here to reset the Bluetooth, optical input, RCA inputs, the subwoofer output. I'll talk a little bit more about that subwoofer output later on. And then you have your banana connections, some nice connections here to connect to the other speaker. A place to connect the power and your on and off switch. Now, the one thing to note about these and the previous models, they don't have a grill. So if you have kids and you're worried about them poking out the tweeter, maybe this might not be the best option. Even though it does have those nice gold terminals, the cables that it comes with are just plain cables, so nothing fancy here. You may want to treat yourself to some cables. I'll leave a link in the description to the ones that I prefer to use. They're also inexpensive to kind of match this total system. So I didn't mention earlier, but these come in at $249 for a pair, and they have a remote. I mean, it's a nice touch. It's a nice remote. Very easy to use, very simple. Power, mute, volume up, down, play, pause, back, forward, change sources, dim the light, that's handy. And then your tone controls, treble and bass up and down. They have different color options. To me, the walnut and white finish had a really nice look to it. This is nice and plain, but again, a little bit plain for my taste, but you know, that other option is to me the best. This depends on whether it fits your decor. One thing that this does that some of the more expensive speakers do, like the Vanna2 T1 Encores, the T0s, the Klipsch, the 5s, they have subwoofer outputs, but when you connect the sub, it detects it, and then it applies an 80 Hertz high pass filter to the speakers so they can actually play louder. So that's really cool, this does that. So as far as listening impressions, I do have some notes here, and I'll just go through some of those here. The first thing I noticed is that it has less aggressive compression. One of the things I noticed about the Ai60s is they had a little bit too aggressive of a compression algorithm where it would try to just kind of compress everything, and it took away the dynamics and some of the stuff started sounding a little bit muddled. I noticed that it wasn't as bad on the Ai40s. I noticed on this one, it's even less than that one. So it does have a little bit, but not close to what I was experiencing with the previous speakers. The thing is that because this is a ported speaker, the limiter did start a little bit earlier. The previous sealed version, the advantage is it doesn't typically have as much bass, but with a ported design, once it's below the tuning frequency, it can really damage the woofer. So it has to be careful, pros and cons, right? With a ported speaker, you get a little bit more bass output at that tuning frequency, but you can't push it as hard with DSP. On these, I never heard any distortion. It was able to play loud enough in most rooms, and the bass still remained. So a lot of times they try to cut the bass off in order to let it play louder. I could still hear a decent amount of bass. Everything sounded decent. So it didn't sound like they had dynamic equalization, meaning it didn't change the sound profile, although it did have some sort of limiter. With a smaller speaker like this, you have to choose between whether it can play loud or deep. They kind of opted more for the low bass extension, which I prefer in a speaker like this. You get to hear a little bit more bass, but it can't play as loud as some other speakers. For a small to mid-sized room, I think it'll be fine. It just depends on your expectations. Don't expect to be playing these at super loud volumes with crazy bass. It's just still a small speaker. I had here that it was somewhat neutral, but it seemed bright to me, and we'll take a look at the measurements later and see if that's true. I said it has impressive soundstage depth. It was not overly wide. Basically, when it came to the soundstage, I found that it was a bit brittle, meaning, you know, it was very picky about where I place these and how I angled them. Some speakers you can just kind of place anywhere and you get a nice stereo image. These are a little bit pickier, and that might be because of the dispersion pattern, but just something to take note of is that these are dependent on where you place them. So if you're limited, something to keep in mind. I said don't place it too close to the rear wall because you may get some boomy bass. The sub was a little bit hard to integrate. I wasn't sure where I was supposed to cross it over, even though it says 80 Hertz. I found that I was having a hard time. Maybe they're using a slightly different slope on this for the crossover, but typically normal is something like 12 or 24 dB per octave. I'm not sure exactly what this is. I'll have to go and take a look at the measurements again, but I just remember it being not very easy to integrate with subs. So now let's take a look at some of the measurements. They correlate with what I heard, so I think they'll do a better job of explaining what I'm hearing and what I've experienced listening to these than me just saying, you know, some flowery words. Measurements I took in REW, and that should tell you everything you need to know about them. Just kidding. So I've applied psychoacoustic smoothing just to keep it simple. Psychoacoustic smoothing is what our ears typically hear. So I took these measurements, whoa, back in June. Wow, it's been a while. So here's the front of the speaker, and you can tell the rising response above 3 kilohertz. There is the treble boost that you get out of the box. And overall, it's decent. It's not a perfectly flat speaker, and I wouldn't expect that for a speaker of this price. Here is the back where it shows the port. And so you can see the port is actually extending the frequencies down a little further. If I were to say this is the middle here, around 91 decibels, 90, 99, 88, maybe, you know, somewhere around here. This is 45 degrees horizontally off axis, and you can tell it still follows the same basic response, which is what you want. You don't want this to change drastically. If you go 45 degrees below, you can tell it's still pretty much the same. It's following the same kind of curve, which is, again, what you want. Above is typically where you don't want to be, above the tweeter. And you can tell that's where you get this kind of like this dip down here. Yeah, this is the main area, and that's normal with most speakers. So here I wanted to see what happens when I raise the volume up. And actually the curve didn't really change very much from the initial curve. You know, all of them kind of stay the same regardless of how loud I turn the volume up. So that's good. They're not applying dynamic equalization. So this is with no tone control. And if I do treble -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, then you can see that it hinges around, maybe around 1 kilohertz, somewhere around here. So somewhere around 5 decibels each way. So here's again with no tone control, with the bass at +5 and the bass at -5. You can see you can go either 5 decibels up or 5 decibels down. That one hinges maybe around 500 hertz right there. So this is what happens when I plug in a sub. The 80 hertz high pass filter kicks in, as you can see there. This is the back with the high pass filter, and this is the back of the speaker with no low pass filter. So at your listening position, a lot of people prefer to use some kind of target curve. This one's the Harman target curve. And if I were to look at this with a sub, just out of the box, that's about as good as I could get. Here's with the treble at -5. If I had the treble at 0, this is the type of response I would get at my listening position, which is just too much brightness up here above 3.5 kilohertz. The final settings that I used, I was able to get a response like this at my listening position, which is pretty decent. So if I'm being very generous, the F3, meaning where the bass starts to roll off at -3 decibels, is somewhere around 55-ish. You know, I think they were claiming a little bit lower than that. But what I found was that looking at my old measurements of the AI40s, they actually had a lower F3, somewhere around 41 hertz, because they were using a lot of DSP to enhance the bass. So the best settings that I found with no sub were this bass at +5 and treble actually at -5. So that seemed to give me the best possible response. So looking at the response, it looks like with a sub, I was using the -5 dB treble response as well. I think I remember just keeping the bass at 0, and I let the sub take over from here, and that's where the settings on the sub kind of differentiate how this is going to respond. So again, I did test these with a subwoofer, the SB3000, which is actually much more expensive than you'd probably use with these speakers. The reason I use a sub for this test is because I know it has a flat neutral response, and it has a lot of settings for me to integrate this with this speaker here. A lot of the SVS subs actually react similarly to the settings, so I'll just tell you what I used. I had it on positive polarity, -20 dB of gain. I actually used a 60 hertz crossover with an 18 dB slope instead of at 80 hertz. I felt like it blended better that way. And I had to use 10 degrees of phase shift. That'll depend on your room, but try it out and see what you find. One of the problems I ran into was that there was some kind of like sound coming into the subwoofer. It almost sounded like there was a compressed signal going into the subwoofer, and there was kind of a heartbeat to the sub where if that wasn't playing anything, you could hear it like doop, doop, doop. So I'm not sure if that was with my particular unit, but I feel the need to share that with you guys. All right, so I have the subwoofer connected now. I have this turned up pretty high, and I have this turned up pretty high, but listen. Not sure if you could hear that or not. Okay, so overall, I appreciate what Fluance is doing with these speakers. These are very inexpensive speakers relative to other stuff that I get to review. But if you were to ask me if these are better than the previous AI40s, I would have to say I don't think so. I would have to say that the previous AI40s with the fixed power supply, the one that didn't give that noise issue. So if you can get that, I think it's a better overall value at $199. I'm not sure if they raised the price or not. Than this, I'm not sure if you can still get them. But I like the fact that they were sealed. You didn't have any port chuffing. You didn't have any issues with the port. And they were able to utilize a little bit more of that DSP because it was sealed design versus a ported design. When the original AI40s came out, I actually said to them, I wish that they would come out with a ported one because I wanted something with more bass extension. And this one seems to have a little bit less. So I'm going to go ahead and put these on my speaker leaderboard and let's see where they place. All right, so here we are at the speaker leaderboard. I think I might have forgotten to mention that this is a Bluetooth speaker, Bluetooth 5.0. So if you want to use it for that, it's pretty handy. Their claimed frequency response was 35 hertz to 20 kilohertz. I found that it did not actually go down to 35 hertz with -3 dB reference point, maybe -6, -10 dB. Yeah, maybe. So this does use a Class D amplifier. It's 2 by 45 watts RMS, so 45 watts per speaker. Okay, so here we are at the speaker leaderboard, and they do fit into the powered speakers category. Where do they place? I would say, just scrolling quickly past this, where would they place? These are all some pretty good speakers here. I would say right above the AI60s. I do think that they are better. The AI60s had a lot of compression, and I think you're going to find that in most of these categories, it's going to place around the same area, right above the AI60s. You know what? Actually, it may actually be better than this Monolith MM5R. Better than these? I can't recall. These were much more expensive. I think these were about $700. So the fact that it's around there is pretty good. So for best bookshelf, Looks, build quality, sound quality, and value, I would say, you know, again, above this Monolith M55R. Best for desktop, these are going to be pretty decent for desktop because they're smaller, but again, they do have that hiss. Not very expensive. I'm going to go ahead and put them above the Fluance AI60s again. Now you may be wondering, like, hey, you were raving about the AI60s. I thought you thought those were really good. And you know what? The truth is that things change. I get to review more speakers and my opinions do change, and that's what you see here. So where do they place under $500 since they're $249? Again, I'm going to put them above the Fluance AI60s. So last, best overall sound quality regardless of the price. And I would have to say that it's going to go, no surprise, right above the Monolith M55R. I think these are pretty close, both of these. This Fluance AI40 may have a better look, maybe some more features. I don't know. Those are pretty close. So there you have it. If you liked the video, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. That's it. Take care. Bye-bye.